My husband's mistress was sitting in my chair. Not metaphorically, literally. She was behind my desk in my office wearing a silk blouse the same color as the walls I had painted myself 3 years ago, spinning slowly in my ergonomic chair like she had already measured the room for new furniture. My husband stood beside her with his hand resting on the back of the chair. My chair looking at me the way men look at something they've already decided to throw away. "We've made some organizational changes," he said. His name is Derek. We had been married for 6 years. We had built this company together, or so I believed, until I learned that together meant different things to different people. To me, it meant 70-hour weeks, missed dinners, a miscarriage I grieved alone because he was in Phoenix at a conference that turned out not to be a conference. To Derek, it meant having my name on the paperwork while his was on the lease and his was on the bank accounts and his was, apparently, on a hotel room in Scottsdale registered under D&V Callaway. My name is not Vanessa. My name is Claire. The company was a staffing agency, mid-sized, profitable in a quiet, unglamorous way that Derek had always resented. He wanted to be in tech. He wanted a startup with a valuation and a TechCrunch article. Instead, he had a staffing agency in Columbus, Ohio that placed nurses and medical technicians and physical therapists across 3 states. And it worked because I understood the healthcare labor market the way other people understand their own heartbeat, intuitively, without effort, because I had studied it for a decade before I ever met Derek. I founded it. I signed the LLC paperwork alone, on a folding table in my apartment, with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Derek joined 18 months later, after the agency had its first profitable quarter. He brought enthusiasm and a good handshake and an ability to walk into a room full of strangers and make every single one of them feel like the most interesting person alive. I had always admired that about him. I had not yet learned that the skill has no loyalty. It works on everyone equally, including women named Vanessa. He became COO. I remained CEO. Those were the titles. But over the years, he had quietly shifted things. Vendor relationships, banking contacts. The lease on the office was in both our names, but when I once tried to change the signatory on one of our lines of credit, I discovered Derek had already removed me from it 6 months earlier. When I asked him about it, he said it was a clerical error. I believed him. That is the thing about loving someone. It makes you generous with explanations. The clerical errors accumulated. I started keeping records 18 months ago, not because I suspected anything specific, because I am a person who keeps records the way other people keep spare keys. Out of habit, out of the understanding that one day you may be locked out and very glad you had the copy. I noted vendor payments that seemed high. I photographed internal memos I had not been copied on. I kept a folder on a hard drive that lived in my car, not our home office. I did not know what I was building. I only knew I was building something. 4 months ago, I found the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. I am not someone who searches pockets. I was taking his jacket to the dry cleaner because he asked me to. The receipt fell out when I lifted the hanger. It landed on the floor with the quiet inevitability of something that had been waiting to fall for a long time. I stood in our kitchen for 11 minutes without moving. Then I picked it up, I photographed it, I put it back in the pocket. I dropped the jacket at the dry cleaner and came home and sat at the kitchen table and understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives after the shock has already passed, that I was not going to cry. I was going to work. I spent the next 4 months working. The first thing I did was call my attorney, a woman named Diane, who I had used for contract disputes and who had the energy of someone who has heard everything twice and is no longer impressed. I told her what I knew. She asked what I wanted. I said I wanted to understand exactly what I owned and exactly what I did not. She told me to bring everything I had. I brought 3 years of documents in a banker's box. She spent 2 weeks going through it. When she called me back, her voice had a particular quality to it. The quality of someone choosing their words carefully because the picture is worse than expected. Derek had restructured the equity in our operating company 11 months ago. He had used a provision in our shareholder agreement, a provision I had not read carefully because I trusted him to dilute my shares in the parent entity by bringing in a silent investor. The silent investor was a holding company, registered in Delaware. The holding company was controlled by Derek and Vanessa jointly. He had effectively moved himself from 49% ownership to 61% without telling me. On paper, I was still CEO. In reality, I was an employee at a company I had founded, and my largest shareholder was my husband's girlfriend. I sat with that for a long time. Diane asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I needed 30 days. She said she would prepare everything and wait for my call. I did not waste the 30 days. The thing about running a staffing agency for a decade is that you accumulate relationships the way rivers accumulate sediment, quietly, constantly, layer by layer until the riverbed is something entirely different from what it was before. I had relationships with hospital systems in 4 states. I had relationships with independent recruiting firms who fed us candidates. I had a relationship specifically with a woman named Ruth who ran a private equity fund that specialized in healthcare services acquisitions and who had, over the years, asked me twice whether I had ever considered selling. I had always said no. I called Ruth. She picked up on the second ring because Ruth is the kind of person who always picks up, which is one of the many reasons she has the fund she has. I told her I was reconsidering her question. She asked me why now. I told her the truth, which was that the ownership structure had become complicated, and I wanted to simplify it before the complication grew. Ruth understood complicated ownership structures the way surgeons understand anatomy. She did not ask unnecessary follow-up questions. She asked me to send the financials. I sent what I had. She came back in 11 days with a number that was 8% above what I'd expected. More importantly, she came back with a mechanism. Because the operational entity, the one that actually employed the staff, held the contracts, maintained the licensing, was structured separately from the parent holding company, and because I remained the sole signatory on the operational entity, I had the ability to enter into an acquisition agreement independently. The operating company was where the value was. The parent holding company Derek had maneuvered himself into controlling was, without the operating company beneath it, essentially an empty shell with a nice address in Delaware. Diane confirmed it was legal. Ruth moved fast because Ruth always moves fast. We executed the letter of intent on a Tuesday. The due diligence period ran 3 weeks. I went to the office every day. I sat in my meetings. I reviewed the placement reports. I responded to Derek's emails with the same measured professionalism I had always used, which was not difficult because our communication had been professional and measured for so long that warmth had become the exception rather than the rule. He had no idea anything was happening. He was busy. He and Vanessa were apparently looking at condos in the Short North neighborhood, which I knew because our company card had a charge from a real estate agency there that he had categorized as a client entertainment expense. I approved the expense report without comment. The acquisition closed on a Friday afternoon. I signed the final documents in Ruth's office, with Diane beside me, and when it was done, Ruth's assistant brought in a bottle of sparkling water and 3 glasses, and Ruth said, simply, "Welcome to the other side." I drove home. I cooked dinner. I ate alone because Derek said he was working late. I washed my dishes. I went to bed. On Monday morning, I walked into the office. Vanessa was in my chair. Derek had apparently decided that the weekend was the right time to make his move. He had given Vanessa a key card. He had put a nameplate on my office door that read V. Calloway, Director of Operations. He had emailed the staff on Sunday night. I saw the thread on the shared server saying that effective immediately the company was undergoing a leadership transition and that Vanessa would be assuming day-to-day operational oversight while Derek focused on strategic growth. He had not emailed me. I learned about my own removal the way the rest of the staff did, from a Sunday evening email sent at 11:47 p.m., which told me everything I needed to know about how long he had been waiting to do this and how certain he was that I could not stop it. He was standing in my office looking at me with the expression of a man who has rehearsed this moment and believes he is ready for it. "We've made some organizational changes," he said. He was wearing a new watch, expensive, the kind of watch you buy when you believe you have just won something. I looked at Vanessa. She had the particular posture of someone trying to project authority while privately unsure whether they have earned it. She was younger than me, prettier maybe, in the way that requires more maintenance. She had done something to her hair that morning that suggested she had known about this moment in advance and had prepared for it. I looked at the nameplate on my door. Then I looked at Derek. "Where would you like me to sit?" I asked. He blinked. He had expected something else. Tears, maybe, volume. He had prepared for a scene and I was not giving him one, which confused him in the way that only happens when you have fundamentally misread the person you have been living beside for 6 years. "There's a workstation in the bullpen," he said, "just for now, while we transition." The bullpen, open floor plan, no walls, shared desks for junior recruiters who were 22 years old and ate lunch at their keyboards. "Of course," I said. I walked to the bullpen. I sat down at an empty workstation. I opened my laptop. Several of the junior recruiters were watching me with the pained expressions of people witnessing something they cannot intervene in. One of them, a young woman named Priya, who had been with us for 2 years and was genuinely excellent at her job, caught my eye and gave me a look of such open mortification on my behalf that I almost smiled. I did not smile. I opened my email. There was one waiting for me from Ruth, sent at 9:15 that morning. It read, "Congratulations on the close. Per the acquisition agreement, the transition meeting with the operational staff is confirmed for 10 a.m. today. My team will arrive at 9:50. Please confirm you can receive us." I typed back, "Confirmed." I checked the time, 9:22. I had 38 minutes. Derek spent those 38 minutes in his office with Vanessa, the door mostly closed, the blinds angled in the way that communicates privacy without quite communicating what kind. The junior recruiters kept their eyes on their screens. The office had the particular silence of a place where everyone knows something is wrong and no one is sure what to do about it. At 9:52, the elevator opened, and Ruth walked in with 3 people I recognized as her due diligence team, and 1 person I did not recognize, who turned out to be her general counsel. Ruth has a presence. She is 61 years old, and she has the calm of someone who has been the most powerful person in every room she has entered for so long that she has simply stopped noticing the rooms. She was wearing a gray wool blazer and carrying nothing, which meant her team was carrying everything, which is the posture of someone who has not needed to carry their own materials since approximately 2008. She walked past the reception desk, past the bullpen, and stopped in front of me. "Claire," she said. "Good morning." "Good morning, Ruth," I said. Derek had appeared in the hallway behind his office door. I could see him through the glass. He was watching Ruth with the expression of a man trying to place a face. He could not place it because he had never met Ruth, because Ruth and I had done our work carefully and quietly and entirely outside of any context he had access to. Vanessa came to stand beside him. She was holding a coffee mug with my company logo on it. Ruth's general counsel, a compact man named Harris, walked to the center of the open floor and asked, in a clear carrying voice, whether the full operational staff could please assemble in the main conference room for a brief all-hands meeting. The junior recruiters began gathering their notebooks with the reflexive obedience of people who have never ignored a directive delivered in that particular tone of voice. Derek walked out of his office. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice had the boom of someone who believes volume is authority. "Who are you, and why are you in my office?" Ruth looked at him. There was no hostility in it. There was no warmth either. It was the look of someone appraising a line item. "I'm Ruth Heller," she said. "My fund completed the acquisition of Callaway Staffing Solutions operating entity on Friday. Claire retained me as the incoming principal owner." She paused one beat. "You're Derek." The color left his face in stages. First the forehead, then the jaw. "That's not possible," he said. "The company isn't for sale." "The operating entity was Claire's to sell," Ruth said. "The shareholder agreement you executed 11 months ago applied to the parent holding company. It did not govern the operating entity, which remained under Claire's sole authority as founding CEO. She turned to Harris. "Do you want to walk them through the structure?" Harris had a folder ready. He always had a folder ready. It is, I understand, his entire personality and the reason Ruth pays him what she pays him. Derek turned to me. I was still sitting at the bullpen workstation. I had not moved. I had not raised my voice. I was watching him the way you watch a weather system from inside a structure you know is built to code, with interest. Without fear. "You sold the company," he said. Not a question. An attempt at comprehension. "I sold the operating entity," I said. "The part I owned, the part I built. I let that land. The parent holding company is intact. You and Vanessa still own 61% of a Delaware shell with no assets, no contracts, and no staff." I tilted my head slightly. "Congratulations on the condo search, by the way. I hope the short north location works out." Vanessa set down the coffee mug. Derek looked at the nameplate on the office door, the one that read V. Callaway. He looked at the new watch on his wrist. He looked at me sitting in the bullpen like furniture he had forgotten to throw away. "You planned this," he said. "I kept records," I said. "There's a difference. You rearranged the ownership structure without telling me. I read the shareholder agreement more carefully than you expected me to." I stood up finally and picked up my laptop. "You assumed I wouldn't. That's the thing about people who think they're the strategist in the room. They never account for the possibility that someone else is also thinking." The staff had mostly filtered into the conference room. Priya was still at her desk, and when I walked past her, she said, very quietly, "I always knew." I didn't answer, but I kept the sentence with me the way you keep certain things. Small and warm in your pocket. Ruth's team took over the conference room. Harris walked Derek and Vanessa through the acquisition structure with the detached thoroughness of someone performing a procedure they have performed many times. Derek interrupted twice. Harris answered both interruptions by pointing to the relevant page in the folder without changing his expression. Vanessa said nothing. She sat with her hands in her lap and her silk blouse and her new title that existed only on a nameplate and in a Sunday night email that the staff had already stopped believing in. At one point, Derek said, "This is a breach. We'll litigate." Diane, who had arrived at 10:15 and was sitting at the end of the conference table with the specific calm of an attorney who has already stress-tested every possible counter-argument, said, "You're welcome to. Discovery will be extensive." She opened her own folder. "We can start with the Delaware Holding Company formation, the share dilution executed without board notice, and the company card charges categorized as client entertainment." She set a printed page on the table. I recognized it. It was the real estate agency charge from the Short North condo search. We have 14 months of expense reports. I've flagged 43 line items. Derek looked at the page. He said nothing. Ruth stood up. She does this when a meeting has reached its conclusion, which she senses the way some people sense weather. She extended a hand to Derek with the same professional courtesy she would extend to anyone, because Ruth does not do cruelty and does not need to. "The transition plan is in the folder Harris gave you," she said. "Claire will remain as CEO through the operational transition. Her employment agreement is already executed." She looked at him steadily. "I'd recommend engaging your own counsel before responding to anything, but I'd also recommend doing it quickly. The staff have questions, and they need leadership that's authorized to answer them." She looked at me then. "The office is yours," she said. I walked back down the hallway. The nameplate was still on the door, V. Calloway. I lifted it off the bracket with one hand. It was lighter than I expected. Most things are, once you're actually holding them. I set it on the credenza outside the door. I went inside. I sat down in my chair. It was still warm. Derek appeared in the doorway. Behind him, through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Vanessa gathering her things. Harris was explaining something to her, and she was nodding the nod of someone who has stopped processing information and is simply waiting for the moment to end. Derek looked at me for a long time, without speaking. I let him look. I was not in a hurry. "Everything I did," he said finally, "I did because I didn't think you'd fight for it." "I know," I said. "That's why you lost." He left. I heard his footsteps go down the hallway, then the elevator, then nothing. I opened my laptop. I had a 10:30 call with Ruth's integration team. I had an email from Priya asking if her position was secure under the new structure, and I wrote back immediately to tell her yes, that her performance reviews were part of the acquisition documentation, and that I would be meeting individually with all senior recruiters by end of week. I sent the email. I looked out the window. Columbus in October is gray and honest. The trees doing what they always do, giving everything up without drama, just letting it go because that is what the season requires. I thought about the hotel receipt falling out of the jacket pocket, the 11 minutes I stood in the kitchen without moving, the phone call to Diane, the call to Ruth, the 38 minutes I sat in the bullpen while the clock moved toward 10 o'clock and Derek sat behind his closed blinds, believing he had already won. I thought about the word together and everything it fails to mean when only one person is actually using it. My phone buzzed. It was Ruth. "How are you feeling?" she texted, which was unusual for her because Ruth is not typically a feelings inquiry person, and so I understood it was a genuine question. I thought about it for a moment before I answered. Like someone who read the contract, I wrote back. She sent a single response. That's all it ever takes. I set the phone down. I had a company to run. I had always had a company to run. The only thing that had changed was that now everyone in the building knew it too, including the man in the elevator, riding down with his new watch and his empty holding company, finally understanding what it cost to underestimate the person who built the thing you tried to take. I didn't watch him go. I had already moved on to the next item on my agenda. That's the thing about keeping records. You always know exactly where you are,